They say heroes come in all shapes and sizes, but so do villains. Edgar Wright's Ant-Man was there at the very beginning of Marvel Studios, but it took 8 long years for him to finally make it. And when he did, he found himself in a hornet's nest, as Marvel pushed him to shoot a script he didn't write and not in his signature style. Spoiler alert, he quit, causing a last-minute scramble for a new director and a complete rewrite. It was less a tale to astonish and more of a shit show.
Here's the thing: is I get very superstitious about like sort of talking about things before they're done, because I don't want to be the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
And talk about something if it doesn't. I mean, it will happen.
Yeah.
But I feel very jinxy talking about it.
Right. Okay.
Here's the deal. Just give me the facts.
Just the facts. Only the facts.
Breathe. Focus. Keep it simple.
No doubt. Okay.
The Marvel Universe is full of classic characters. Some were instant successes, others took years to find their popularity. And then there are the ones that have existed for decades, just crawling underneath the surface, loved by only a select few. But mainstays nonetheless. Such is the case for Ant-Man.
Ant-Man? What, you haven't heard of me? No, you wouldn't have heard of me.
Created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby, the scientist Henry Pym, who invents a shrinking serum, was originally a one-off character introduced in Tales to Astonish in 1961. He was reintroduced a year later as the superhero Ant-Man. From there, he consistently popped up, reimagined with a new twist in hopes of hooking more readers. From giving him a crime-fighting partner in the Wasp, to reversing his serum to become Giant Man.
Ant-Man should have been as popular as any. And when they do the Ant-Man movie, I think it'll be very good. The reason it didn't work in comics, visually, the pictures were never that interesting.
The inherent silliness of the character was something that Pym himself couldn't shake in the comics, but also made him a joke for the uninitiated.
What are your superpowers again? You talk to the ants, is that it?
Well, partly, but mainly I shrink myself down to the size of an ant while retaining my full human strength.
Oh, best stay out of this guy's way. Oh, every molecule's quivering now.
Yet he remained a favorite of Stan Lee's. Lee felt what couldn't be achieved on the page could work on the screen, and he really wanted it to be a movie. In 1986, Roger Corman's New World Pictures purchased Marvel Entertainment, eager to make some low-budget superhero films. And Lee immediately pitched Ant-Man. New World's producers knew Disney was already developing a film called Teeny Weenies, about a bunch of teenagers surviving their own backyard after they're accidentally shrunk down to 1/4 of an inch tall. They figured if they could get an Ant-Man movie made as soon as possible, audiences wouldn't care what film came up with the idea first. New World would only get around to making The Punisher with Dolph Lundgren and the TV special Power Pack before selling Marvel to keep the lights on. So nothing came of Lee's version, but Teeny Weenies was released in 1989 as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, helmed by future MCU director Joe Johnston. In the year 2000, Howard Stern, of all people, attempted to buy the rights because he felt he was the only person who saw potential in the character. Marvel didn't give it to him because they were currently in negotiations with Artisan Entertainment to produce a plethora of their remaining properties that weren't already sold off to other studios during the comic book land grab of the 2000s. It included Captain America, Thor, Black Panther, Deadpool, Iron Fist, Morbius, The Punisher, The Power Pack, Mort the Dead Teenager, and Ant-Man. Artisan, who was mostly known for home video B-movies, wanted to make them at low to mid budgets. Not a single one of these was ever produced, and Lionsgate ultimately acquired the studio in 2003, letting the characters revert back to Marvel. But before that happened, two wet-behind-the-ear screenwriters, Edgar Wright and Joe Cornish, pitched their vision for an Ant-Man movie. The two men became friends while working on their respective TV shows and sat down to write a film together. Ant-Man proved to be the perfect opportunity, with Wright a longtime fan of the comic, and Cornish liking that it was a fairly unknown superhero to general audiences.
And I think he's a brilliant character in a really unexpected way. He doesn't come necessarily with the preconceptions that other more famous Marvel characters do.
Since the Ant-Man mantle had been worn by many, Wright and Cornish sought to play into that history by having two of the iterations teaming up. Their outline had an older Hank Pym mentoring a thief, Scott Lang, to complete a high-stakes heist using his shrinking tech. Artisan didn't care for the criminal aspect and preferred it to be more family-friendly. They passed on the project. Years later, Edgar Wright was attending San Diego Comic-Con in 2004, showing off his new film, Shaun of the Dead. By complete chance, Marvel Studios CEO Avi Arad and producer Kevin Feige were also in attendance, meeting with filmmakers to gauge their interest in working for their forthcoming, independent production studio. When they sat with Wright, he mentioned he already had a treatment for an Ant-Man film. Feige loved it.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Yeah, boy!
He kept it in mind, but at that time, Marvel Studios, as we know it, was still being established and wasn't ready to make any deals yet. David Maisel, the president of the studio, was in the process of consolidating as many of the Marvel properties as he could so they'd be able to build out a universe of films. With Lionsgate returning a bulk of them, Maisel ending talks with other studios, then bartering with Universal Pictures for the Hulk, Marvel would eventually gain all the rights to the original founding members of the Avengers from 1963. Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. They would later revive a frozen Captain America to join them. With the studio firmly in place, Feige, now president of production, promptly hired Edgar Wright and Joe Cornish to pen Ant-Man. And in 2006, Marvel Studios made their grand reveal at Comic-Con. Of the various heroes they announced to be in production, only 3 of them had directors attached. Jon Favreau for Iron Man, Louis Leterrier for The Incredible Hulk, and Edgar Wright for Ant-Man. Wright and Cornish turned in their screenplay in early 2008, but then Iron Man hit theaters. The colossal success of the MCU's first film had Marvel rethinking their production slate leading to the Avengers. Thor and Captain America were well on their way, but it was decided to fast-track an Iron Man sequel rather than focusing on Ant-Man. The timing worked out for Wright as his second film, Hot Fuzz, proved that Shaun of the Dead wasn't a fluke. Between his geek bona fides and his kinetic visual style, Wright suddenly became one of the most desired filmmakers in town.
This is about to go off.
Steven Spielberg personally asked him to write The Adventures of Tintin, but he was too busy making a fake trailer for Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino's Grindhouse, and helping Mike White adapt John Ronson's non-fiction book, Them, into a horror comedy. After that, he and Cornish did finish the rewrites on Tintin, and before Cornish parted ways to direct his first feature, Attack the Block,
Allow it.
they turned in a second draft of Ant-Man. But by that time, Marvel had assembled their creative committee. Initially formed during Iron Man's production to maintain faithful adaptations of their comics, as years of shoddy licensed films had tainted their brand, this group of Marvel creators and executives really stressed the universe in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They wanted each film to have references and characters that showed that these movies were all connected, and those setups would pay off later down the line. So what Wright and Cornish thought was a shootable script, they were now being asked to revise again to include more of the MCU. Wright felt one of Iron Man's strengths was its simplicity and self-containedness. He didn't want to cram too much Marvel history into Ant-Man, nor have him introduced in another film. And anytime he was interviewed about it in the preceding years, he insisted that he was unconcerned about the larger MCU. His movie would be squarely focused on the hero. At the same time, when Feige was interviewed, he'd say the only reason they were making the film was because it would be through the lens of Edgar Wright, but that it would also need to be rewritten to include more of the MCU. At an impasse, and knowing Ant-Man wouldn't be made in time for Avengers anyway, Wright figured the film could wait and chose to first take on Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. In hindsight, this one decision would ultimately seal his fate regarding Ant-Man. While Scott Pilgrim bombed at the box office, it was a critical favorite and an instant cult classic. Wright was 3 for 3, confirming he was the king of genre mashups and a visual auteur to be reckoned with.
Wow. Wow.
As Wright returned to Marvel and began developing Ant-Man in earnest, Eric Fellner, his producer on Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, was diagnosed with cancer. He couldn't bear the thought of completing his Cornetto trilogy without Fellner at his side, let alone not being able to see it. Wright asked Marvel if he could delay Ant-Man again and make The World's End.
And so they were actually very good in terms of like, okay, well, we'll see you in 2 years, you know. I mean, the thing is that character's been around since 1962, so he's not going anywhere. And the later we leave it, the better the special effects will be.
Marvel wanted Ant-Man to be in Phase 2, so they asked Wright if he could at least shoot some test footage before he left. This would give Marvel a sense of the style Wright was aiming for, while also experimenting with how they do the shrinking effects. The test was filmed in June and shown, in secret, at Comic-Con the following month, further building hype for Wright's vision.
I've always thought there was a great film to be made out of it, and also a character that would actually look better in live action than on the page.
The World's End opened in the summer of 2013, so it was now finally time to make Ant-Man. Problem was, since the near decade that Wright had been attached to the project, Marvel Studios had changed. A lot. The give this film to anyone who can make it work attitude had dissipated. Between the likes of Jon Favreau and Joss Whedon, Marvel was solidifying the look, feel, and filmmaking process of the MCU, from cinematography to the amount of jokes. Nothing too stylized, nothing too serious. Marvel feared Wright's visual flair, energetic editing, and specific type of humor would clash with the rest of their films.
What?
In fairness to them, the MCU was meant to be a cohesive quasi-television series at a grand scale, and their characters, though originating from their own distinct movies, needed to come and go without that particular movie skipping a beat. It's a similar question many shared about Deadpool joining the MCU. If he were to cameo outside one of his own films, tell a meta joke,
Zip it, Thanos.
or break the fourth wall,
Suck it, Fox. I'm going to Disneyland.
it would be a jarring tonal shift that might shatter the artifice other films cultivate to make you forget you're watching a movie. Would people expect Ant-Man's film style to carry over anytime he's on screen in an Avengers movie? Regardless, Wright was an auteur who expected every aspect of his films to be guided by his hand.
The reason that I had to walk away from Ant-Man is because by the time that I had started doing it, which was kind of 8 years after I'd started writing it, now there was like a formula, not just the movies themselves and the stories, but also like a house style and a look and a way of shooting things. So I basically I knew I couldn't make that movie in the same way that I'd made Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
Then there was the creative committee. They started to believe the MCU's unprecedented success was due to their efforts of quality control. And with each new film, their grip tightened. Currently in the midst of their Age of Ultron tug-of-war, the extremely meddlesome bunch were no longer giving suggestions, only issuing demands. They gave Wright 25 pages of notes for him to incorporate into his script. They felt there were too many characters, the dialogue needed to be simplified, the family aspect should be increased while reducing the inner workings of the heist, and since the movie spans characters across decades, and 11 movies had preceded it, that the larger MCU should factor in more. They stipulated that Hank Pym should have been an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and knew Howard Stark, and that Scott Lang's relationship with his daughter Cassie should be at the center of the film, so they could set her up as a future Young Avenger.
It's the wrong details. It has nothing to do with the story.
Furthermore, there was studio head Kevin Feige. He was actively involved in his productions at this point, from scripts down to and especially the editing. Everything had to go through him. By and large, he would defend Wright, and other filmmakers, as much as he could from his bosses. But he also held the unified vision for the MCU. So Wright was getting overbearing input from the committee, Feige, Feige's producers, and even Joss Whedon, who at that time was given free rein to do rewrites on any Phase 2 film as he saw fit. Hell, he was introducing Ultron in his next Avengers film, a villain created by Hank Pym in the comics before Wright had the chance to introduce Hank Pym. That said, Whedon felt Cornish and Wright's script was the best screenplay to ever go through Marvel, and didn't understand what they were all up in arms about. Wright was walking the line between implementing some of their ideas, but not sacrificing the very reasons he wanted to make the film in the first place. But they were reaching a standstill, and with each new barrier put in front of him, production kept getting pushed further down the line. In the meantime, while sets were being built, Wright began casting. He snagged Michael Pena, Corey Stoll, was in talks with Evangeline Lilly, and in the vein of Anthony Hopkins, Robert Redford, and Glenn Close, Wright's big get was Michael Douglas. For the titular hero, Marvel was thinking Joseph Gordon-Levitt, yet Wright's number one choice throughout was Paul Rudd. Without a doubt, Paul Rudd is one of the most effortlessly charming and likable actors of his generation, and widely considered one of the nicest. He had fronted multiple comedies, but he was still an odd pick to headline a Marvel movie. Not really known for his superheroics, and more for his improv skills, and trolling Conan O'Brien.
You've been showing that stupid clip on my show.
Thank you. Thank you.
For, I think, 15 years.
Like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Pratt before him, Rudd was a perfect outside-the-box casting.
But I think the reason that maybe he wanted me to do it, or was that it's a guy who probably is ill-equipped to actually be a superhero.
Yeah.
I think that was always my take on it. I'm not going to be Captain America, and I'm not going to be Thor, even though we have a incredibly similar physique.
As much as he tried to avoid it, Wright still needed to resolve his issues with Marvel. He was standing his ground, and they weren't having it. Guardians of the Galaxy had yet to be released, and the committee felt they were already gambling on one quirky sci-fi comedy based on an obscure comic. And that wasn't a risk they were willing to bet on again. In the spring of 2014, Marvel held an emergency meeting. And out of it was decided that in-house writers Eric Pearson and David Callahan would rewrite the script to incorporate the laundry list of notes from the committee, but without Edgar Wright. And in 5 weeks' time, Wright would determine if it was a screenplay he'd want to direct. Wright's annoyance grew into anger. He was playing ball, trying to meet them halfway, and they were telling him it was all or nothing. When the 5 weeks passed, Marvel handed Wright their updated script. Dumbed down with an MCU reference on every other page, Wright was furious. As a writing-directing auteur, having his script taken away from him, watching it fade away piece by piece, then being told to shoot that version in the way that they wanted, Wright felt like a director for hire. This was not what he signed up for, and he'd had enough.
The most diplomatic, answer is that, I wanted to make a Marvel movie, but I don't think they really wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie.
After months of trying to make it work, Wright gave up and formally tendered his resignation. The decision actually surprised Kevin Feige. There's always been disagreements, whether big or small. That's the collaborative nature of filmmaking, and in particular, the collaborative nature at Marvel. At no point do we hire filmmakers who do everything we say, and at no point do we hire filmmakers that we let just do anything they want. There is always a middle ground that we find, and it just became clear that both of us were just being too polite over the past 8 years, I guess. We sat round a table and we realized it was not working. But better for us and for Edgar that we figure it out then and not move it through production. The biggest disappointment for me is just the relationship, because I like Edgar very, very much, and we were very close for many, many years. On May 23, 2014, Feige and Wright released a joint statement that he was leaving the film. Knowing it was stereotypical of them to say it, they went with the old adage of creative differences, because it was true. As fans and the entertainment industry at large were shocked by the news, both Joss Whedon and James Gunn took to social media to eulogize the loss. Then Wright posted, and quickly deleted, a photo of silent film legend Buster Keaton looking heartbroken, holding a cornetto, of course. Many took this as Wright alluding to Keaton's lasting regret of signing with a big bad studio and losing his artistic license in the process. Having never seen the film even to this day, and who could blame him, Wright is thankful he and Joe Cornish received a screenplay credit and that he was able to cast his friend Paul Rudd in a major blockbuster. He did see Civil War and thought Rudd was the best part.
Look, I want to say, I know you know a lot of super people, so thanks for thanking of me.
Although he doesn't regret leaving the film, his sole grievance was the time lost.
It was very disappointing situation. It happened very late in the game. I don't think anybody's quite recovered, and my heart goes out to Edgar. He's been involved with the project for a long time, but he's talented enough that you'll be hearing a whole lot from him, and I'm sure with a little vengeance.
Wright believed that by making Ant-Man, it would allow him to make a passion project he'd been toying with for years. Ironically, because he left, producer Eric Feldner, now in remission, asked Wright if he finally wanted to make it. Since most of his crew left in solidarity, from cinematographer Bill Pope to composer Stephen Price, Wright hoped to get moving on another production as soon as possible to ensure all these people had jobs. Barely a week after leaving, Wright was off to the races with Baby Driver. For Feige, his race was to find a replacement, and quickly, because Marvel and Disney weren't going to delay the film. After unsuccessfully trying to get Wright to return, Paul Rudd suggested his Anchorman director, Adam McKay. Caught between a rock and an anthill, McKay was friends with Wright and was busy prepping The Big Short. But he was also friends with Rudd and had always aspired to make a Marvel movie.
I said, why don't I do the rewrite with Rudd?
Right.
That way I can respect Wright, Edgar, and help out my buddy Paul with the rewrite. So it ended up being a perfect situation. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed working with Feige, man. I mean, there's a reason that thing is clicking. That guy has good taste.
They implemented the notes given by the committee, along with ideas from Evangeline Lilly and Corey Stoll on how to beef up their characters, added the opening scene with Pym at S.H.I.E.L.D., reworked most of the dialogue, and asked to include one scene with another Avenger. After seeing Captain America the Winter Soldier, McKay thought the Falcon would be the perfect, unexpected cameo. Feige had full confidence that Rudd and McKay could bring Ant-Man back from the brink, while he focused on getting a new director. As Ant-Man was going to play into the humor more than previous MCU films, Feige met with mostly comedy directors, and the choice came down to a final two, David Wain and Peyton Reed. Wain because of his offbeat sense of humor, and as an added bonus, Paul Rudd has been in nearly every one of his films.
Clean it up and come to my office for the meeting.
You look like you've had a bad day.
Tell me about it.
Well, you came in here looking like crap, and you haven't said very much.
You can say that again.
Well, you came in here looking like crap, and you haven't said very much.
Tall is large, and grande is Spanish for large. Venti's the only one that doesn't mean large. It's also the only one that's Italian. Congratulations, you're stupid in 3 languages.
There are some differences beyond just the plumbing. Do I want you on the front lines? I don't think so. The Russians will come in with their guns ablazing, and you guys will be off powdering your boobs.
You gonna take it? You gonna take that dick? You gonna take that dick, huh? I'm gonna pop off a piece of my dick.
Yeah, say that again. Well, you came in here looking like crap, and you haven't said very much.
Hey, tell me about it.
Well, you came in here looking like crap.
Okay, we get the point.
As for Reed, it was like his whole life was leading to this moment.
I was a drummer for a time in the 80s in a punk band called Johnny Quest. And in addition to being the drummer, I was in charge of drawing the flyers for the shows. And we did a show, I think, in 1988, and I drew a sort of a ripoff of Avengers #1, where all the band members were members of the Avengers. And of course, Ant-Man was an original Avenger, and I drew myself as Ant-Man.
Feige had actually worked with him back in 2001 when they were developing a Fantastic Four film. But 20th Century Fox didn't like his 1960s era setting and hired Tim Story to start over. Reed took that 60s energy and made Down with Love.
This is weird. In Down with Love,
which came out in 2003. There's a shot where there's a newsstand that Sarah Paulson and Renee Zellweger are standing in front of. And there's a row of Marvel comics from 1962 on the newsstand, including an Ant-Man comic.
Wow.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's true.
Years later at Marvel Studios, Feige was in search of someone to helm Guardians of the Galaxy, and he remembered Reed's passion for all things comics. Had James Gunn said no, Reed would have been his second choice. It also helped that Feige found Reed to be an extremely affable gentleman, which is one of two factors he weighed considerably for directors.
The criteria usually comes down to two things. Do something that gets on our radar. Do something that showcases, who you are and the potential of what you can do. Then we have a lot of meetings and see if we're on the same page creatively, see if this is somebody we can spend day in and day out with for the next 3 years.
Seeing as how the release date wasn't going to move, Feige had no time to vet David Wain and offered Reed the job. Despite saying a week prior that he felt bad for the poor sap who had to follow Edgar Wright, Reed was that sap. Unsure about stepping into a VFX-heavy movie with an unmovable deadline, he spoke to Jon Favreau and James Gunn about their experiences with Marvel, read all the versions of the script, gave Feige his opinion on them, then sat with Rudd and McKay to discuss their changes. The three of them ended up geeking out together so much, they added the subplot of Janet Van Dyne's disappearance, setting up Lang's third act sacrifice by introducing the Quantum Realm. A microverse that didn't exist in any previous draft, and funny enough, would shape the MCU going forward.
What if there was a way that we could enter the quantum realm at a certain point in time, but then exit the quantum realm at another point in time? Like before Thanos.
Lastly, as a sign of goodwill, Reed reached out to Wright to clear the air. Wright appreciated the gesture and only asked that Reed not use any of his storyboards.
It's awesome, You guys are breaking down walls, you're healing. It's important. I ruined the moment, didn't I?
Yes, you did, yes.
Reed would also email Wright congratulating him on the release of Baby Driver. A mere 15 days after Wright's departure, Reed made his decision.
And? What'd he say? He said yes.
Reed requested that filming be pushed a month so he could wrap his head around the enormity of the production and pull a cast together based on the new script. The only actors that remained after Wright were Paul Rudd, Michael Douglas, Michael Pena, Corey Stoll, and Evangeline Lilly, who would only sign on after seeing the revised script. Nearly everyone else was either written out, sorry Matt Gerard and Kevin Wiseman, were new additions, like Judy Greer, Abby Ryder Fortson, T.I., and David Dismalchian, or were replaced because of the delays, such as Bobby Cannavale taking over for Patrick Wilson. At long last, filming began in August of 2014.
It's about damn time.
As productions go, nothing out of the ordinary happened. That isn't to say it was easy. It was definitely rushed to make that July deadline. After Adam McKay handed in his final script, Rudd continually fine-tuned it with script doctors Andrew Barrer and Gabriel Ferrari, who added the tip montages.
But I was banging the drum from the beginning. It's like, I want Ant-Man to be under 2 hours. I want to do a movie that's tight and taut and fast-paced and kinetic.
In order to hit that mark, Reed cut a handful of scenes, including a cameo with William Sadler's President Ellis, and the film's original opening with Pym's covert mission from the 1960s, where you never actually see the Ant-Man, a remnant of Wright and Cornish's script from day one. It was shortened to a PowerPoint later in the movie.
Silly, I know. Propaganda. Tales to astonish.
Reed pushed to experiment with as much microphotography as possible, which all had to be replaced with CGI anyway, and made the incredibly audacious decision to start the film with Marvel's riskiest visual effect ever, a digitally de-aged Michael Douglas, kicking off their obsession with the technology. Even after everything they went through, Feige assured Paul Rudd that they weren't going to abandon him or Scott Lang because of all the trouble. So he pitched them their plans for Captain America Civil War, with Ant-Man and Giant Man.
Holy shit!
When the film finally reached picture lock, Feige gave Reed a deeply appreciative hug, saying, "It's a movie. Thank God." Leading up to the release, Marvel attempted to counter the months of bad press with one of the weirdest campaigns in recent memory.
Ants! Ants! Ant-Man! Sorry!
But reporters still had to ask about one thing: the differences between Reed and Wright. Sorry, had to do it.
It was pretty bumpy for sure, and I'm really sad about it. I mean, Edgar's brilliant, and Edgar brought me on. Edgar's my friend.
We looked at the script that Edgar had written,
right,
and it never veered that far from it. Just as far as the blueprint of it, the kind of the story.
I think it's fair to say that none of us would be here, and there might not even be an Ant-Man movie if it weren't for Edgar and Joe. And the idea to make Ant-Man a heist movie structure was all Edgar and Joe. And also the idea of a movie that all drives toward a third act where the big battle between the good guy and the bad guy takes place in a little girl's bedroom. That was always there from the beginning, and I stand by the fact that I think that's genius. I love it.
All eyes were on Marvel to see if they salvaged the film from the wreckage, or whether this unknown pint-sized hero would end their unrivaled success. On July 17th, 2015, Ant-Man inched its way to the big screen. Reviews called it overly cliched, but in spite of that, and all its behind-the-scenes drama, it's entertaining, charming, and funny enough, even if many of the jokes don't land. Plus, introducing Paul Rudd to the MCU was a delightful and welcomed addition. Holding the rare honor of being Marvel's cheapest production, at $130 million, the film became their 12th #1 weekend and grossed $519 million worldwide. Not bad for an unsung superhero. Yet it was a short-lived victory. Phase 2 had come to a close, and Marvel was mostly successful in bearing the struggles of those first few films. But only a few short months beforehand, Joss Whedon was spilling on how difficult working with Marvel can be. Then losing Edgar Wright, a geek god to many, was a categorical PR disaster. Whether true or not, Marvel had developed a reputation of bullying their filmmakers. And from the outside looking in, it was getting worse. Kevin Feige had a giant-sized problem to contend with. The creative committee had pushed Marvel Studios to a breaking point. A civil war was inevitable.